All right, this question is from Derek St. Holmes, Esquire. I love Derek, man. Derek is a actual, real, respectful student of the wrestling game, and he asked me questions that really remind me of I've been there and done that type of guy, but also some fond memories. So I was going to talk to Derek and answer some questions about the Dallas Sportatorium. My history with the Sportatorium, when I was about 19 years old, 18 years old, every Saturday, myself and a group of my friends would get together and watch the Von Erichs from the Sportatorium. You know, I got a lot of history in my brain as far as being a fan for Dallas wrestling. The Von Erichs, the Freebirds, Chris Adams, Gino Hernandez, and of course all that took place in the Sportatorium. So when I got a call to go down and wrestle at the Sportatorium, I was elated beyond words. I was like a child still. Pulling up to that building and seeing it from the outside. Now, the questions Derek asks are about how beat up the building was. You have to understand, I went to the Sportatorium after a run in Memphis, Tennessee, a 9-month run for the USWA territory. And that being said, a lot of the spot towns back in 89, 90 were so recessed and broke, you know. So the venues, therefore, reflected that. You get real thick skin and you figure out how the showers are laid out, how the locker room was laid out. There were some towns in Arkansas, I swear to you, that a third of the population didn't have either running water or electricity. So as far as the building being gross or dirty, and I'm talking about the Sportatorium again, I wouldn't say it was like that. It was old, and my skin had thickened up, so I wouldn't look at that building and judge because that was kind of pro wrestling. So from the outside, it looked like a glorified pole barn with a shitload of parking. It was located in a decent part of Denton County. I'm not sure if it was unincorporated Dallas or Dallas, but a stone's throw away was a busy, populated, beautiful section of Dallas. And then there was this, well, I guess what I would say is that from the outside and from a distance, it looked like what you guys might drive across when you see a indoor flea market, so to speak. But anyway, I love pulling up there and seeing that giant sign, a giant sign that said Sportatorium, wrestling every Friday and Saturday. And I pulled up with a friend of mine from that territory who was also a friend of mine from USWA, Sweet Daddy Falcone. And that's when I said, someday it will be mine. Someday there will be a Randatorium. Well, fast forward, and that's why we call the Premier Pro Studio the Randatorium. It's that rib that's been going on for 30-something years now. The inside of the building, like I say, I wouldn't say run down. I would just say old. You know, I hear about the rats and the roaches, and I never saw the rats or the roaches. However, I will say that when I was production manager for Impact Wrestling, TNA Impact when it was on Spike, and we were renting out $33,000 a month studio at Universal, there were rats, feral cats, and roaches. You know, so I guess what I'm trying to say, some of your finest establishments, if you look at them, they all have rat traps in the corners of certain areas. So it wasn't overrun with rats. I've never seen a rat or a cockroach. You know what I'm saying? It was just old. You know, the ring, this was the worst. They actually cemented the posts into the foundation of the building, which made the ring rough. And when you look back, you'll see only your real men took bumps in that stiff-ass ring because it just couldn't be adjusted. There was absolutely no give, you know. He asks me here, at one point a group stole all of the water faucets and fittings or something like that. I could see the building sitting stagnant, probably between World Class closing down and then Global opening up. where somebody might have come in, and that was the scam at the time, was to go in and steal brass and sell brass. So it was probably something like that, and that carries on till today. It's just like thieves that go and rip off catalytic converters from different cars because of the fine minerals inside those that make them worth something. But it wasn't anything when I was there that, we didn't use the showers and whatnot. The locker room shower was out in the open. This was very common, though, like I say, for that time period, the way locker rooms were. The only thing I would say about the Sportatorium is it wasn't necessarily a dump. It was just an old building. And at that point, we didn't really worry about things like we do today, where you guys, even if you're not a sports fan, see a baseball movie, a football movie, or even a boxing movie or a special or something where they give a shit today about it being kind of like a green room that you would use for a regular television show. It's high production and, a higher quality. But it wasn't bad. I never got athlete's foot or anything like that. And it really wasn't uncomfortable either because, I think Vince McMahon, up until 10 years ago, still ran the Louisville Gardens. I guess I would compare the Sportatorium to the Louisville Gardens, which Vince probably ran WWE up until about 2000 or so. It's not that it was beat up. It's just that it was old. It had everything you needed, but nothing really changed. Let's say the water quality was bad. Well, you could probably see it, I don't know anymore, in your locker room gyms in your high schools or even your homes. If you're in an area where the water is bad with mineral deposits, you get that rust around the faucets. It had that, something like that, I would say. It was a glorified pole barn. It was kept pretty clean. It didn't stink, that's for sure. He asks me this, did you ever get to upstairs offices? Yes. That's where I got paid. We would go up there, and the guys that would work in the office were Skandor Akbar, Percival Pringle, a.k.a. Paul Bearer, and Bronco Lubitsch, the referee. That's where we would typically go to get paid. Kevin would hang out in there, Kerry Von Erich, when he was in town. And, of course, when Fritz would come to the building, he would go up there. There was nothing really wrong with the office. Again, it was just old with 1950-something furniture, The other thing about it was that's where we would go to get paid most of the time. And also, here's an example of why it wasn't that bad. Percival Pringle, Paul Bearer, had made up his mind that he was going to give wrestling one last shot before he went to the trade that he learned, which was embalming, a mortician, a funeral director. To save money, because business was so down at the time, he actually lived in that office. So it really wasn't that bad. It wasn't from the rumors that you get. And I think those rumors probably spawned from what later became Global Force Wrestling. Global Championship Wrestling. Global something, with Joe Pedicino and his wife and a conglomerate of other guys. They'd never really been on the road and worked in the towns where we worked. And that being said, you could go to a building that was beat up and old, you know what I mean? And definitely not what I would say fastidious venues. But man, if you drew 5,000 people there, that's what you were focused on, So I think these guys kind of came in. Global ended up being a bunch of guys, for the most part, that have never been anywhere or done anything. Some of them was their first chance to really be on a television show, because I think they were still on ESPN. And then you had your stayovers or your layovers or your guys that had been there for a long time trying to teach them. And that would be Mike Davis, John Tatum, Rod Price, Stephen Dane. You know what I'm saying? But no, the rumors aren't true. It wasn't that bad. And I have to say that I know I'm a much, much better performer and even more well-traveled, being able to say that I stayed down there for 4 months and worked every Friday night and or Saturday night in the Sportatorium. There was a crow's nest that I didn't even think about. I noticed it, but I never thought about it whatsoever, and it's kind of a fun story to close this with. Mick Foley was between WCW contracts, and I say it was right before he went and probably worked at WCW one more time before he ended up at Vince's as Mankind. So this is the kind of guy Foley is, and he was part of that. He really loved the sport, the history of the sport, and his own history. I'm positive that Mick Foley, like myself, gayed off for, wow, we are in the Sportatorium. And you guys got to remember, when we were young men, young adult men, World Class was one of the first syndicated television shows, so to us it was a really big deal. But anyway, on his own dime, he just came down to visit us and visit some of the guys that he was close to, for a weekend. And, I didn't know Mick was even there. He kept his head down until after my match. They says, hey, Mick Foley's up in the crow's nest and he wants to talk to you. I'm like, holy shit, I have my third professional match with Mick. So I had to figure out how to get up there, but when I got up there, it was pretty cool. It was equivalent of an old skybox, and it was nice to reconnect with Mick, and it really gave me quite a respect for the industry, because to see a guy like Mick Foley, who did have some TV time and was in some storylines on WCW, just come back home, I can't tell you, the other thing about the Sportatorium is the fans. When I was there, we were drawing about 800 people, and that was on the way out right before it closed. And that was a real devout base of fans. We weren't doing any new business. Those are people that were just diehards that had been there, and that's why we do what we do at Premier Pro Wrestling now, is we're trying to get people accustomed to it, is tape on Friday nights and Saturday nights, just like they did at the Sportatorium. And our belief is eventually, with the population of the Chicagoland versus the population of Dallas, we're going to end up also drawing a live crowd for the tapings. But anyway, Derek, keep those questions coming. And I still know I owe you about Frank Morrell, and I really want to get into Frank Morrell. But yes, at the end of the day, don't believe everything that you read and half of what you see, because it was just an old beat-up building. And speaking of old and beat up, should I be condemned? Don't answer that question. So guys, keep the questions coming. I love answering them, and I love the reminder of some fond memories of my well-traveled wrestling career. Don't forget, the reason we put all the content out there is to try to get you to support us. Please subscribe to our Patreon. Our Patreon, Premier Pro Wrestling on Patreon, has so much content. I would say the most content of anybody that puts up wrestling content on Patreon. Premier Pro Wrestling on Pivot Share. Some of you guys are more comfortable with Pivot Share because you're used to Pivot Share, and we don't want to scare you off and say, okay, no more Pivot Share, only Patreon. But if you would, dabble in the Patreon, because we get a bigger piece of our own content. And of course, while you're here on YouTube, like, subscribe, and don't forget, we're taping wrestling at our studio within Chicagoland area in southeast Wisconsin. We're in Woodstock, Illinois, which is right in between. All right, here comes another awesome question about the Sportatorium from Dallas, Texas, from Derek St. Holmes.